Judith Taylor interviews Karen George. This is the third interview in the Thyroid Trust 24 Questions series.
So the first question I wanted to ask you is, what's your favourite word?
Yeah, I wanted to be able to come up with something very intelligent, and I couldn't think of anything. So the first word that kind of came to me was cake, because you can't say it without smiling. Cake, yeah, because it's probably the one word you can't say without smiling. So yeah, that's my favourite word at the moment.
It's cake. That's fantastic. Do you make your own cakes?
Yes, yeah. I do quite a lot of baking, so.
Oh, that's super. And what's the nicest thing anyone's ever done for you?
Yeah, I was kind of, the first thing that sort of came to my mind really, I suppose in the context of this interview as well, was sort of when my partner looked after me after I had my thyroid surgery. He hates anything medical, anything to do with hospitals. So I think it was a real kind of challenge for him, but he stayed there with me the whole time at the hospital. He walked me to the operating theatre, and I think if he hadn't done that, I probably would have run away because I was terrified of having surgery. And after the operation, he really looked after me, feeding me yogurt and soft food, because obviously I had very sore around the area of the operation, helping me get comfortable at night and propping me up with lots of cushions and washing my hair and doing jigsaw puzzles. And he arranged a surprise visit from my mum, and a kind of small things, but when you're recovering from an operation, they're kind of, really important. And, you're sort of feeling fragile and delicate there. It's those kind of small things that matter.
That's so good to hear. And I'm very conscious of the fact that some partners will actually run a mile rather than get involved in any way. Not in my family, but I've certainly come across people who, when they get a diagnosis and need surgery, that they find that they don't get that support.
Yeah, I think it can be very hard when you're used to seeing somebody well and strong, and then suddenly they're not, and it sort of changes the dynamic. So I think that can be quite hard for people to get their head around that are close to you. So, and obviously they've got their worry about you and so on. But yeah, and more recently, I think in August, my niece came down to visit me in Surrey, and it was because of the pandemic and the lockdown. I'd been shielding since kind of March, really. So I barely left the house, and it was the first time I'd seen anyone from my family since February. So it was really lovely to see her. So yeah, that was really nice.
That's really great. So what's your favourite weekend activity?
I like to get out for a bike ride normally, or a walk out in the countryside. Having been down in Wales for the last couple of months, it's been surfing or some sort of sea-based activity a lot of the time, but it's getting a bit chilly now for me, so I need a thicker wetsuit, I think. But yeah, something outdoors.
That's great. And do you have any other hobbies?
Yeah, I like reading, do a lot of reading, gardening, and a lot of cooking. I like cooking sort of with the things that have grown in the garden. So we've got apple trees and gooseberries and blackcurrants, and a bit of a vegetable patch. So I like sort of taking a cuisine or a country and then sort of cooking an entire meal, sort of, starter, main course and dessert, all from that sort of particular country. So yeah, I enjoy doing that.
You sound like a very busy person. So you you mentioned that you like reading. What book are you reading at the moment, or what have you read recently?
I'm kind of between books at the moment. So I've just finished rereading The Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafón.
Oh, yes.
As a librarian, it really appeals to me. The idea of the cemetery of forgotten books. Yeah. And I'm just ordered, and I'm about to start reading The Salt Path, which
I'm sorry, the what path?
It's called The Salt Path, SALT, And it's about a couple who sort of have a whole series of sort of devastating events. He's diagnosed with a terminal illness, and they lose their house, and they just decide to set off and walk the entire Southwest Coast Path, which is 630 miles. And it's about their adventure and their story. So I'm quite looking forward to reading about that. Apparently it's quite a moving and inspiring book. So I think that'll be a good lockdown read.
Yes, that sounds really fascinating. So next question is, what do you truly and honestly think of social media?
Probably like a lot of people, got kind of mixed views, really. I think there are positives and negatives. Sometimes I'm glad that I'm of an age I grew up without social media as a teenager, and it's not all there for everyone to see. So I think it gives everyone a voice, a public voice, and that can be a good thing and a bad thing. In the past, a lot of these people wouldn't have had a platform to air their views. But I do think it's amazing. I mean, the fact that you could actually tweet Donald Trump's account, he might not see it, but the fact that you can sort of tweet directly to people like that is quite amazing, really. When you think back sort of 10, 20 years ago, you know, to have access to those people. I guess on a more personal level, I'm in quite a lot of groups on Facebook, which for people with Graves' disease, with thyroid disease. So I find that a sort of useful form of support. I'm also in ones for people with who go cycling a lot, and so I like being part of those sort of communities of interest through social media. But the amount of misinformation and sort of disinformation, you know, especially around sort of we've had with the pandemic and COVID-19, I think really highlights some of the worst aspects of social media. So very mixed, I think.
Yes, exactly. And some of the social media platforms are really quite self-interested. And I like the community aspect, but I'm not such a big fan of, say, Instagram.
No, it's funny, I really don't get Instagram at all. I joined it recently. I don't quite understand the purpose of it. I find it really strange. It just, it's not kind of speaking to me at the moment, but yeah.
Yeah, I've joined it to see photographs from friends and family, but other than that, I agree. I think it's very strange.
Yeah.
Quite right. We grew up without all this.
Yeah.
Yeah. And moving on, who inspires you? Who is your hero, or if you prefer, heroine?
I don't know that I have one particular individual. I think I'm kind of inspired by people who sort of resist the pressure to conform and sort of make their dreams happen. So at the moment, I'm getting inspired a lot by people who kind of left the rat race behind, bought a camper van, and are kind of living the dream and traveling the world. And there's quite a few people out there that are, you know, got blogs and YouTube channels that are sort of documenting their travels, and I'm very jealous and very inspired by those people, because it's not easy to adopt that kind of lifestyle and leave everything behind. So yeah.
Okay, so no one individual stands out.
No. Perhaps I should. I'll have to think about that one a bit more.
So moving on to the Thyroid Trust, can you share what your role with the Trust actually involves?
Yeah, so I'm currently a trustee, so I've been involved with setting up the Thyroid Trust since its conception, so reviewing and contributing to policy documents and the Charity Commission registration and all the paperwork that entailed. The Board of Trustees is responsible for ensuring the effective management of the charity, of the trust. So as a trustee, I take that responsibility very seriously. Obviously, we're looking at the sort of strategic direction of the organisation and looking at how we can make it sustainable going forward, things like fundraising and so on. As a volunteer, I try to pick up other pieces of work as and when I'm able to. So, for example, I recently drafted a process document for managing the supply of our Thyroid Trust t-shirts, so that then that task can be picked up by another volunteer. So I think it's important we kind of document all of our those sort of processes so that we can get sort of volunteers involved and sort of doing things for us. So yeah, sort of a whole variety of things really, helping to organise support group meetings when we're able to hold them face to face. So yeah.
And how did you get into that? What was your first contact with the Thyroid Trust?
I think it goes back to 2012 when I sort of discovered that there was a thyroid support group in London, and got in touch, started going to the meetings, and just found it so valuable that I just decided to start volunteering. So, you know, used to help out at the meetings, sort of greeting people on the registration desk, making the teas and coffees, whatever was, setting the room up, whatever was needed really. And it's just kind of evolved from there. So.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that you were a librarian. What kind of work do you do, or did you do?
Yeah, so I was a civil servant for 28 years. I left in April 2019 under a voluntary early exit scheme. But yeah, as you say, I qualified as a librarian in 1989, I think it was. Started applying for jobs, and one of the jobs that I was offered was at the Treasury and Cabinet Office in Whitehall as a librarian. So I started working there and ended up spending my entire 28 years in the civil service in the government knowledge and information management profession, in a number of different departments and roles. So I worked at the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food, the Department of Health, and then spent 12 years at the Home Office, where I ran the main Home Office library service and the Prison Service Library, and also a separate legal library. And then I moved to a more strategic role, and responsible for sort of managing the department's organisational approach to information knowledge and records management. But for the last 5 years of my career, I moved into a government agency in a role that combined the strategic and the operational aspects of information management. So I had responsibility for managing the agency's records and all the third-party data that it acquired. So quite a variety of roles over the years, really.
You sound really enthusiastic about it. What do you think is the one thing your work has taught you that's helped you in other parts of your life?
Yeah, I think the importance of accurate and timely information, really, and good record keeping. As a librarian in the government department, the accuracy and reliability of the information that you're finding is critical. If you're asked to provide information or statistics or research to a minister who's taking part in a debate in the Commons, then they have to be able to rely on that information. We were once asked, when I was at the Home Office, we were asked to provide. We had a call asking us to get some statistics for the Home Secretary, who was actually on his feet in the Commons at the time, and we managed to get it to him by the time he'd kind of sat down from making his speech. So, you know, that, and as I said earlier, there's so much misinformation and disinformation around these days, that knowing what information you can trust is kind of really important. And I also think I'm a bit of a stickler for governance, for sort of proper and effective governance, and that's probably what you get from being a civil servant for too long, really.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I do a lot of writing patient materials, and the issue of reliability and trustworthiness comes in there also. So back to the thyroid. Why are you passionate about thyroid awareness?
I think for me, it's so others can benefit from what I went through and don't have to experience some of the sort of negative sort of problems that I sort of came across. Again, I find it incredible, really, how much misinformation and sort of misconceptions there are around thyroid disease amongst both patients and medical professionals. I wish that I had found a thyroid support group earlier, because when I was diagnosed, I knew nothing about thyroids or thyroid disease. And unfortunately, I didn't come across the London group until about 2 years after my operation. And I've learned so much from them since. But I think if I'd learned more, if I'd come across the group before and been able to learn from the people there, I might have had a different outcome. So I think the work that the Thyroid Trust is doing is so important in informing thyroid patients and empowering them to make effective decisions around their care and, their ongoing treatment.
I think that's so true. I mean, most of us have learned more from joining thyroid groups than we ever learned from our doctors.
Yeah, definitely.
So, have you ever taken part in a fundraising activity to raise awareness for the thyroid?
Yeah, earlier this year on the 25th of May, which is International Thyroid Awareness Day, I did a bike ride to raise awareness and to help raise money for the Thyroid Trust. It was only 25k, but I planned it using an app that a lot of cyclists use to plan their routes. And so the idea was that once I'd finished the route, it would be the shape of a butterfly. Didn't quite go to plan, but that was the intention anyway. And then as I was doing the ride, I took photographs of things on my route that spelt out the word thyroid. So a sort of signpost, it was the shape of a T, and a tree that had a kind of, the branches formed a Y shape, and so it spelt out the word thyroid as I was going around, and we put those photographs on our Instagram page. So yeah, so it was nice.
Yeah, that sounds really original and fascinating. So, Karen, how did you first know that there was something wrong with your thyroid?
So I had a thyroid storm, although I didn't know that was what was happening to me at the time. It all started one day at work when I just had a complete kind of emotional collapse during a meeting, which was kind of a bit embarrassing. I just became really tearful. I was shaking, and I just had no idea why I was feeling that way. So I went to a local near a walking centre near work, an NHS walking centre, and they said that it was stress, probably due to stress. So I went back to work, and over the next couple of weeks just carried on having really strange symptoms. I lost about 3 stone, a stone rather, in 3 weeks, despite feeling absolutely ravenous all the time and constantly eating. I couldn't stand. I had muscle weakness in my legs. I had tremors. I couldn't tolerate certain foods. Just a really strange sort of set of things were happening to me. And then one day I was at work and my legs swelled up, just like about 4 times the normal size. And I went back to the NHS walking centre, and they said, "Oh, that's not good. You need to get to A&E." So I went up to the hospital, and I had a resting heartbeat of 133. And pretty soon, the doctor said, "I think it might be your thyroid." He did an ECG, and I was admitted to an emergency medical ward, kept in hospital for a week, and during that week, I was diagnosed with Graves' disease. They did some scans to see if there were other causes, such as thyroid cancer or nodules, but diagnosed with Graves' disease. So in some ways, I was fortunate because my diagnosis happened more quickly than I know a lot of people do, because some people are ill for years and years before they're diagnosed. So in some ways, I was lucky because it happened in quite a short period of time. So that's how I first found out.
That sounds really alarming. It must have been very frightening. So when were you yourself actually diagnosed?
In 2009, around July 2009.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There are different types of thyroid disease, of course. Can you tell us something about your type of thyroid disease and how it's different from other thyroid diseases, if you feel able to do so?
So I have Graves' disease, which is an autoimmune disease, and Graves attacks your thyroid, causing it to become overactive. So it leads to a condition called hyperthyroidism. I think Graves causes symptoms that can be quite different to hypothyroidism. So I had muscle weakness, heart palpitations, I had tremors, I had shakes quite badly, insomnia. I had huge weight loss over a very short period of time. Also, psychological symptoms, so unable to sort of control your emotions, Graves' rage, paranoia, brain fog, forgetfulness. So, yeah, a whole load of quite sort of different symptoms.
And it can sometimes affect the eyes too. Did you have that problem?
Yeah, I was diagnosed with thyroid eye disease. Bizarrely, I didn't actually realise I had anything wrong with my eyes. And the first time I went to visit my endocrinologist, I just walked into the room and she said, "You've got thyroid eye disease," because she could tell by looking at my eyes. And yet I hadn't even noticed. So, yeah, interesting.
Well, there's certainly nothing to see now as far as I can see. Did you have special treatment for it?
Not for the thyroid eye disease. I went to see an ophthalmologist at the hospital, and but I never really had any sort of treatment for the TED, as it's sort of referred to. I take selenium because that's said to help with the thyroid eye disease symptoms. Graves can trigger TED, but then they kind of work in isolation from each other. So I think I had TED in one eye only, and it you know, seemed to sort of go into remission after only a couple of years. So I occasionally will get ocular migraines and feel sort of pressure behind my eyes, but I haven't had TED to the extent that I know some people have. So
yes, some people seem to have loads of operations for it. So it's good to know it doesn't necessarily have to come to that.
No.
So what treatment have you had, or are you still having now?
So after being diagnosed, I was put on the standard treatment, which comprised carbimazole, which is an anti-thyroid medication, and propranolol, which is a beta blocker, which is to control the rapid heartbeat that comes with having an overactive thyroid. And for the next 9 to 12 months after I was diagnosed, I'd had a thyroid storm and had ended up in hospital, and that's how I was diagnosed. So I had to go back to the hospital every 2 months for blood tests and checks. And for most people, this treatment stabilizes their levels, and you know, their Graves will go into remission. Unfortunately, that didn't work for me. So I was told by the endocrinologist that I had no choice but to have my thyroid removed. So in May 2010, I had a total thyroidectomy to remove my thyroid. And as I no longer have a thyroid, it means that I'm underactive, hyperthyroid. So I now take levothyroxine every day and will do for the rest of my life. So it's a small dose, it's 50 micrograms. So.
And you talked about your partner a little bit earlier. So he was the person who supported you when you were first diagnosed and going through your treatment?
Yeah. And it's quite a difficult one, I think. As we said earlier, it's difficult for people who've known you a long time to suddenly see you not being well. And you know, so yeah, I was lucky that he was very supportive. It's interesting. I was thinking about sort of it's, going back sort of 10 years, what had helped me in those early stages. And I remember I didn't know anything about Graves' disease or thyroid disease when I had my thyroid storm. And I remember not long after I'd come out of hospital, standing in a chemist, and they had the BMA series of books available. And there was one on thyroid disease by Dr. Anthony Toft. And I was sort of flicking through it, and I came across the page that had the symptoms for Graves' disease. And I literally had everything that was there on this page. And I could have cried with relief, because, you think you're going mad sometimes when you've got such strange symptoms and they don't seem at all connected. And I just had such strange things going on in my body. And to see it on a piece of paper, realize they actually were all connected to Graves' disease, and I had an explanation, and that I wasn't going mad, that kind of. So that book was, I still remember standing there, seeing that page and realizing that, there was an explanation, and that means a lot.
Even though it confirms that you've got a disease, it's good to know
exactly
what it is, and that you're going through the same as everyone else. So what impact did it have on your work?
Oh, a huge impact, really. I mean, I think I was always kind of a bit of a workaholic. I was very involved in my profession. I'd reached a senior management position within the civil service. Was sort of at the top of my profession, and then all of a sudden I was diagnosed with this illness, and it just completely changed me. All of a sudden I couldn't remember things. I would come out of meetings and I just wouldn't be able to recall a single thing that anyone had said. I would read documents at work and I just wouldn't understand them. I would know what the words meant individually. I couldn't, my brain, instead of being like a sponge, it was almost like it formed this kind of hard outer shell and nothing would go in. And that's quite frightening when you're used to having a brain that just can pick things up, to just suddenly not have that level of comprehension. When I had Graves, I had the shakes badly, so I would be doing presentations, holding notes, and the notes would be shaking because I had the tremors, and all of that just starts to hugely affect your confidence, and I think you try to cover it up and you try to do your job to the same level that you were doing it before, and that's actually quite exhausting, trying to sort of cover it up, and I think you kind of find ways of hiding. I think it's also things like when you have team meetings. In my last role, we were the team were based all over the country, so we used to get together in a particular office to have team meetings, and my boss would always insist that we'd all go out in the evening, and I would just be shattered, and I'd either go along and just be exhausted, or I'd try and make an excuse not to go, and all of that ends up kind of isolating you from people, and it's quite a strain. And I guess I just didn't feel that I could say, well, do you know what, I'm not feeling very well, because you just start to feel like you're constantly making excuses, and so that's quite difficult on the sort of social side of work as well. If you're not going to those after work events, you can sort of start to feel isolated from your colleagues, and I think it's difficult when you've got an invisible illness, because people look at you and they think you're well, and I had so many days where really I shouldn't have gone to work because I wasn't performing, because I felt so ill, but I would go in and I would sit there and I would try and get through the day, and yeah, it's really hard. I had an occupational health assessment when I was at the Home Office after I'd had my surgery. One of the things that recommended was that I would work at home one day a week, because that would help with my energy levels. So that was really useful. But then when I moved departments, I mentioned this at the interview that I worked at home one day a week, and said, yeah, that's fine. But then when I took up the post, my boss said she didn't want me working at home one day a week. So, you know, that was really difficult. And so I had another occupational health assessment. But then my boss said that she wasn't prepared to implement the recommendations from it. And, you know, so, you know, it becomes a battle. And at the end of the day, nobody wants to be ill. You just want the support that you need to be able to do your job. So that was all really difficult. And I think it, you know, it was one of the big factors really in me deciding to take sort of voluntarily exit last year. It's just, I just found it exhausting really, sort of trying to struggle along. And I just wanted to be able to focus on my health and me for a change.
So what do you wish that you'd been told when you were first diagnosed?
I think one of the main things is that there is no cure for Graves' disease. My endocrinologist told me that I couldn't stay on carbimazole long term, and that if I had a thyroidectomy, it would cure me of Graves' disease. And it wasn't until 2 years later, when I joined the support group in London and spoke to other people and started to do research, that I realised that just wasn't true. There is no cure for Graves' disease. Having your thyroid taken out does not cure it. All it does is make you hypothyroid as well. And still to this day, there are people in Facebook groups who've been diagnosed with Graves and told that surgery will cure them. And I don't understand how that is still happening. You know, people need to be made aware that it's an autoimmune disease and it is for life. And actually, there are dietary and lifestyle changes that you can make that might help you. Some people have gone into remission through making those changes. So yeah, I think that is the main thing, because having surgery is not a silver bullet. You know, you then become hypothyroid, and that can bring its own issues and its own health problems.
So based on your experience, what would you say to someone when they're first diagnosed?
Do your research. Find out as much as you can about the illness and what treatment options are available to you. Join a support group like the Thyroid Trust. Learn from others with the condition and learn what has worked for them in terms of sort of dietary changes, supplements, lifestyle changes. And don't be pushed into either radioactive iodine or surgery to kill off your thyroid. Like I say, they're not a silver bullet. So, and it's your body. You know, you have to fight for what you. Obviously, you know, there's a balance. You need to do this sort of in consultation with the sort of your doctors and endocrinologists. But you know, I don't think people should feel pushed into surgery or RAI.
So that they can make their own choices.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what advice would you like to give to health professionals treating people with thyroid diseases?
I guess to some extent it's similar, you know, but listen to the patients. Don't just rely on blood test results. Listen to what people are telling you. Even just like I say, in terms of sort of the symptoms for Graves' disease, you know, they are. I don't understand why we're still at a position where, you know, I went to an NHS walk-in centre and I said all the things that were happening to me, and I was told it's stress. You know, just, you know, you need to manage your stress, and you know, we need to get better at recognising the symptoms and not just dismiss them as being, you know, something else. Especially for females, I think it gets put down to being, you know, hormonal issues and the menopause, whatever. So I think there needs to be more awareness of what the symptoms are. The fact that, I say, Graves is for life, that there is no cure. and just understanding the range of symptoms and how much it can impact the quality of life, and the mental and emotional side of it as well, I think is a huge thing, which perhaps doesn't get talked about quite so much as the physical symptoms.
In other words, to look at the person and to listen to them, rather than just look at the blood test results.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Do you think people in general are becoming more aware of the thyroid?
I don't think so, no. I think, obviously I'm sort of part of lots of sort of support groups, so the level of awareness there is higher than perhaps the general public. But no, I think they're still very, very misunderstood or not known about. And occasionally you'll get a celebrity who'll be diagnosed with a thyroid condition, and everybody thinks, oh great, this is going to help raise awareness, and then the media kind of makes it all sound like it's so easy to manage, and you just take a pill and you get on with your life, and you think, oh no, because it just completely sends the wrong message, really, to some extent. So yeah, I think it's definitely not as understood or as high profile as some other conditions.
So we're coming to the end of this interview now. And there's one thing that we've really barely touched on. I'm sitting here in the Netherlands, and you're sitting in Wales, and we're talking to each other on Zoom, which a year ago we had barely heard about, and now it's become pretty much the basis of our daily life. How are you coping with the COVID-19 situation, the isolation, the lockdown?
Yeah, I go through phases, to be honest. I think very early on, sort of March, April time during the first lockdown, I actually quite enjoyed it. I enjoyed being forced, kind of being at home. The weather was fantastic, and we got lots done in the garden, and we'd spend just hours sat under the apple tree with a cup of tea, watching the birds, and that was just lovely. And then for me, it all just kind of got really messy once they sort of changed the rules, and people could do some things but not others, and you could go some places, not others. And I just found that all really confusing, and I felt real pressure from friends and family to meet up, to go and stay in a hotel, to go to restaurants. And I personally was terrified of getting the virus. So I was being very, very cautious. We weren't going out. We were getting all our food delivered. We were washing the food before we put it away. All our mail was going into a quarantine box outside. We were being super cautious. I felt this massive pressure from people to go into London for a coffee, and I just thought, oh no, I just can't do that. And then so there was a period around sort of August, September where I was really struggling with it all. I felt very cut off and very isolated. And then we came down to Wales at the beginning of September once the sort of restrictions had lifted here. And that has kind of been good for me, because I've been able to get out and go for walks on the coast path, and perhaps get out a bit more than I could back home. So, and I think to begin with, probably like a lot of people, I thought, oh, it'll be a couple of months and then we can all go back to normal. Yeah. And now the fact that it looks like it's going on for a lot longer, yeah, it's difficult. I do find it very difficult. And people have such diverse views. I met somebody down here recently who thinks it's all a conspiracy, that refused to wear a mask, just carrying on as normal. And so, yeah, I find it really interesting that still there are people who think it's a hoax. But yeah, I think we've seen the worst and the best of humanity during this period.
Yes. We have. So now that we've come to the end, what do you think of this video interview experience?
It's interesting. I don't like seeing myself on camera, so I'm not a natural in front of the camera. But it is interesting looking at the questions and kind of thinking back over the last 10 years, and you know, a lot of it I'd forgotten about, really. You know, you kind of push it to the back of your mind, and it's been quite emotional, to be honest, sort of revisiting some of that. And you kind of realise, I think, how far you've come without realising it. So yeah, it's been an interesting experience, and hopefully some of this will help other people who, you know, are diagnosed with Graves' disease and suddenly find their world kind of turned upside down. You know, that it's not impossible to kind of get your health back and you know, find a way forward.
So I'm glad you found it a somewhat rewarding experience.